We are AAWAA, the Asian American Women Artists Association. Our mission is to advance the visibility and recognition of Asian American women in the arts. Our collective is more than just putting on exhibitions and projects. AAWAA is special because of the people who have made it a community. In our own archives, can we transmit more of our energy and more human depth in our files? How do we want to be remembered or known in the future? Could we talk to a future artist or researcher? In an effort to answer these questions, to preserve our legacy, we created Pass It On, an oral history project to collect narratives of AAWAA, to take our group portrait, and to have a conversation between AAWAA members. This pilot episode is about our beginning, the memories of that time as remembered and retold by Flo Oi Wong, Betty Kano, and Kim Anno. Thank you all again. Appreciate your patience and your perseverance with working as we pivot through this. And then also for recording, if you could please say your name and if there's a specific title or any recent things that you would like to highlight about yourself.
I'm Flo Oi Wong. I co-founded AAWAA with Betty Kano. I'm an artist, a poet, and an educator.
I'm Betty Kano, and I co-founded AAWAA with Flo Oi Wong. I'm a grandma and retired and active in the senior Japanese American community and stuff like that.
My name is Kim Anno, and I'm an artist and a filmmaker, and I have a new public art project that's just been installed in the San Francisco airport in Terminal 2. And I have a feature film, a feature documentary called Cuba, Q-U-B-A, about the LGBT community in Cuba that will be released later this year in 2022.
I'm looking forward to seeing this project being released, so we'll keep an eye out for this. I wanted to kind of set the stage. We'll start off from the beginning, and then as the conversation rolls, if you have thoughts or questions for each other too, or things that I'm not touching on that I don't know about or haven't been able to highlight, please feel free to bring that to the conversation as well. This is your time. So I just wanted to ask both Betty and Flo just briefly. I know that there have been different instances of hearing about how AAWAA started, but if you could recall shortly the meeting where both of you guys met at the Women's Caucus in San Francisco.
Well, I'll just jump in on that. The Women's Caucus for the Arts meeting that we referred to in San Francisco is a conference with about 700 or 800 people. I had attended previous WCA conferences before, but the fact that it was in San Francisco and that San Francisco had a third Asian American population, and you see among 700 or 800 people, just a handful of Asian American women, that was really bad. And so I remember talking to Flo about that, along with a couple of other Asian American women, and saying how atrocious that kind of lack of representation was. And I really felt that we cannot expect others, mostly white people, to talk about us if we don't even talk about ourselves, if we don't know ourselves. And I remember having that conversation with Flo, but really, that situation was building up. That realization was already building up because I knew that Asian Americans did not have the slide representation in Mills College slide library, Moira Roth. I knew that their slides of Asian American women, they were just scant, compared to the whole room full of slides of all these, they might have this much on Cezanne or something. And then for Asian Americans, just a handful. So that's how pathetic it was. And that's how I feel like it started.
Um, I was a complete newbie because I became an artist at the age of 40. And I came to the National Women's Caucus for Arts Conference in San Francisco because I was consulting with a consultant, and he said, here's a good chance for you to meet other women artists. So I was really excited to go. And at the conference, I saw Betty, and we were few and far between. And it was a matter of navigating in a place that I didn't know if I was welcomed or wanted or anything. And so I looked for ways that I could feel like I belonged. And I went to one panel discussion, and there were discussions, it was with white women and black women. And at the end, I stood up and I said, how come you don't have anybody who looks like me on the panel? And the person who organized the panel discussion was honest. She said, I don't know any. And I went like, oh, then, I'm here and I'm here to learn, but why aren't there more Asian Pacific American women, here? And they didn't have answers for me. They just were happy to have their conference, and rightfully so, So it was it would be like as if I were jumping into the water in the swimming pool, trying to get to the top and finding that the top was not really sort of open to me. And that was a big eye opener, And I have to thank Betty, because Betty saw me and we talked a little bit, and she said, why don't you go find Moira Roth? And so that was a wonderful suggestion, Betty, because I did. And, Moira saw me, and first thing she said was, why don't I have your slides? I knew nothing. I just knew that I was there in San Francisco attending the meeting. And then after I went to several of the panels, I went, gosh, they're answering issues of sort of mainstream white women artists, and they weren't answering issues that were important to me. And so I stood up and asked questions, and, I was like, why did I come? And it was Betty and Moira that made me feel really comfortable that I belonged too. I knew that I belonged, but the other delegates didn't understand that. It's a very strange feeling to have.
I remember that the feminist movement, on the West Coast women's art movement, the feminist movement, I went to the Feminist Studio Workshop in Los Angeles, and same thing, I felt like it was a white women's thing, and there wasn't any relationship outside of the women's building to the neighborhoods around it, which were Boyle Heights and downtown LA. And I said to my teachers, why don't we relate to the neighborhood? And they're like, well, why don't you do it? And I was like 17 years old at the time. And I said, well, I'll start, but what else, what can I do? I need guidance from my teachers and my leaders. And so when I got to San Francisco and I saw what was going on, I never even considered the Women's Caucus for Art as being a place that I would belong. But when I saw Flo try to enter it, I thought, well, I'd like to enter it. I'd like to be there with Flo. And because you look at all the awards that all those people had won over so many years, and they never gave it to a woman of color ever. And I don't even know if they have since. I mean, I think they do.
They have. A few.
But at the time, it was just like a shock, and you're just like, I kind of rejected it. But then I thought, okay, well, maybe there's a way to get into it. And it was so wonderful talking to AAWAA, because being in a culturally specific organization, you can bring up all these things that you can't in the mainstream art world. And that was just so extremely valuable, as well as the gay issues and all these other issues. AAWAA was always welcoming to all genders and sexual orientation. And also I was telling these women that we had the best potluck I have ever been to in my life. Never before or since. So, that was one of the most wonderful things about it. Just the feeling of community, and hearing from all different kinds of Asian women, not just because we did actively talk about, we didn't want it just Chinese and Japanese. We wanted, where's our Filipina sisters, our Asian Pacific Islanders, like we really tried to reach out to the community, and so that, we were acting as in belonging, the practice of belonging. Back then we didn't have that word for it, but we're just like, okay, well, Asian and Japanese sisters are here, but let's look around. Where else are our sisters? Let's invite them in.
So in the meantime, as Kim was talking about, us being like on the sideline, and there was a door, and maybe went in the door and out of the door. What was going on was that Moira Roth had come up with the idea of collecting slides from women of color artists. And so the conference finished over the Valentine's Day weekend, and on a Tuesday she said, please come up and join this meeting on Thursday. And so I taught school, so I let my kids out of the classroom 5 minutes early. I locked up my room, I hopped in my car, and I drove up. And I made it in time for the meeting. And I walk in, and there are these luminaries from the women's, color communities who are artists. And went, wow, this is just really impressive. And I didn't know anything. All I knew that is I wanted to meet more artists of any color, and whatever. And at the end of and Moira explained what she wanted. I want to do this project, and what we're going to do is, through the auspices of the National Women's Caucus for Art, we're going to create a slide packet available for professors and teachers and whatever to teach about women of artists of color. And I heard her saying, would you go back and organize the Asian American women artists of the Bay Area? And, I live in Sunnyvale, and that's not exactly where I would meet a lot of other, Asian American women artists. So I knew Betty knew everybody. And so I called Betty, and Betty, thankfully, you said yes. And then,
well, I knew Maura from a few years before. She was one of 50 people that I organized to go to Cuba in '88. And from there, before then, I was a part of Alliance for Cultural Democracy, which was a national organization. That's how I met Moira, really, and in the mid-'80s. And also, I knew Kim from Art Against Apartheid. We did projects.
Apartheid,
yeah. And so we really connected with people of color artists. So I think that Alliance for Cultural Democracy, while it was not just people of color, it had this idea of representing people who are not represented. And so that was what motivated Moira in terms of reaching out to people, women of color. And also she was quite aware of the deficit in her own slide library and how to overcome that.
And so when I walked into the meeting that Thursday, I was just in awe of the fact that I was meeting women artists of color, because at most of the panels and discussions at the conference, it was white women. And when I raised questions at the end of the panel discussions, they didn't always understand where I was coming from. It was like, well, what are you talking about? We just want to get women places and spaces to show their art. And I said, but there are more issues than just showing your art. And a lot of the women didn't understand what I was talking about, because they were not as closely tied to their ethnic communities, as I was with mine. And I was thrilled that in the Bay Area there was such a coterie of Asian American women artists, although I didn't know all of them. And so, I was like a kid learning how to crawl, but not knowing that I should be running instead of crawling, because it was that kind of feeling that all this was happening. And I went, yikes. And then Moira started it all. And then the first thing Moira said to me was, where are your slides? And so, it was really a learning experience for me.
Well, the thing that Moira, she was really quite steely, I would say, and very focused in her effort to try to expand her slide collection. And so she brought out the idea of having a slide representation at Mills that brought Asian American Women Artists Association, that was her name, she gave the name to it, to make the slide presentation that was of Asian American women artists. And so that was very significant. It really focused our efforts in a job kind of thing, And we tried to reach out to everybody we knew. And I have the original roster of all the artists that we got in contact with, and the really early computer printout of that log and stuff. And there were, I think, over 50 or 60 artists who each had 2 slides, and we presented them at Mills College. And one of the significant things that really happened was that Lawrence Rinder, who was the director of the Matrix Gallery at UC Berkeley Art Museum, he was going to start working on his dissertation. He came to the presentation and really was taken with Teresa Hawking Chaw's work. And so some of the slides that Moira had, she inserted into the slide presentation. Teresa had been murdered in 1982, so she was already, she was dead, but she was the only person whose slides of that nature we included in the presentation. And it was pretty pivotal that Larry picked up Teresa's work with that. He wrote his dissertation on her, and it resulted in an exhibit at UC Berkeley Art Museum, Matrix Gallery and stuff. And, bigger galleries, and lots happened. And in fact, up to recently, there was an article in the New York Times that was they have these late obituaries remembering people who died a long time ago. So they had one just 2 weeks ago or so of Teresa Hawking Chaw, and her story, which is that she was raped and murdered. And so it was really quite a traumatic kind of a story. And it was recently talked about in Kathy Park Hong's book, Minor Feelings, about anti-Asian violence and the invisibility of Asian Americans. And so in that book, there's a whole chapter about Teresa. I was shocked when I was just reading the book, and all of a sudden there was, the reason is that I graduated with Teresa from UC Berkeley, so I knew her personally. She was in sculpture and I was in painting, but I also knew her story and stuff like that. So this happened as a result, really, of AAWA's presentation of the slides at Mills College.
So I want to give a background to that, the slide presentation that Betty's talking about, because at that Thursday meeting, Moira explained to the gathered women artists of color. Moira was looking at everything from a national point of view, and I learned of a bigger effort of women artists of color to gain recognition and to gain visibility and, exhibition space. And so Moira had talked to the president of the then NWCA to have this slide packet available, a Women of Arts slide packet available through the NWCA. And so as a result, it became a big, huge project. And then there was going to be an application for, I think, an NEA grant. And so each one of us from a different women's artists of the color community went back with the charge of organizing our own community. And so what happened was that we began to realize that a lot of us who were not white, but practicing artists, did not organize in the way that a lot of white women artists did. And the white women artists that I met through the NWCA, they didn't have political issues in the way that women of color artists did. And then there are sometimes when I talk to some of the women, they said, well, why do you want to bring that up? That's political. I said, for me, it is, because people who look like me are a missing link, at this gathering. It was very strange. It was like I belonged for a second, and most of the time I didn't belong. And it was really Moira who opened her wings up and just say, here, my wings, come under my wings, and we'll work together. And it ended up that the slide packet through the NWCA was formed because my late friend of Sarasota, Florida, knew the black president of Revlon. And when she went to him and told him about what we were doing through the NWCA, he says, okay, I will donate, I will back you guys. So it was Revlon that put their money in to create this packet. So in the meantime, we looked to our own communities to find curators. So we asked Margot Machida, and they became the curators for the Asian Pacific American women. We sent out calls for slides. And then so Margot and the other curator, got together and did all the work. And so every community had their own set of curators. And it was an amazing, amazing experience. And Moira was stepping in between NWC and AAWAA. She just navigated both
Right.
places. And it was really an exciting time, because I don't like that we're invisible. I don't like that we don't count. And so I said, okay, I'll throw my energy into it. And it was really hard work. And the reason the NWCA finally was able to do what Moira had suggested was because of the women of color artists who knew how to move ahead and to open doors, because other doors were shut to us. And they
Right,
were
so-
obviously shut to us.
One thing that AAWA did was we had an internal structure, but then we had this external action things that we did, like the NWCA that you're talking about. We also worked with Godzilla organization, and we formed this Godzilla West because there was a Godzilla East going on, and the show, the Curio Shop, was curated. Because at the same time, kind of in the early '90s, a lot of Asian artists were saying this is bullshit.
Yeah.
we have to
Yeah, exactly.
we have to kick that door open.
Yeah.
And
Godzilla.
I know and Godzilla West, Betty worked with, and I worked with for a while, and that was fun, Betty.
Yeah, that was great.
And
we
then
had
one-
we
wait,
did
wait, I wanna-
magazines and exhibitions and jazz concerts.
And to me, I was telling these women also that we started to turn our attention to the Asian Art Museum, and
Yeah,
how we
we
saw that there were no Asian Americans at the museum.
Yeah.
And we had a big public forum that I think AAWA
Yeah.
asked to get going. I remember there was this curator who got up and said, well, it's just so complicated, Asian Americans. We don't know how to define Asian American artists. And we all were shocked and horrified, like, what do you mean? Like, that sounds like a racist comment to us. But we really addressed the idea that the colonial mindset of the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco, where we pay our taxes, and how we supported that museum, was unacceptable.
Totally
we
unacceptable.
It was very emotional. I remember people got up and stood up, and how could you do this? This is ridiculous. And that didn't change right away, but it did down the line. So we just kicked that door further open for the museum. Now the museum has Asian American art in their collection, which is great. For a while they didn't have any contemporary art at all.
Yeah.
And then they realized, oh my God, our audience is dying off, because they were all kind of white, sort of elderly people that would go in and pay the ticket price. And then the Asian had a big financial problem and had to get bailed out by the city of San Francisco. So I believe that whole kind of series of events led to the change of the Asian American Art Museum. I wish there was a thesis written about that, because just changing not only the San Francisco Asian American Museum, but all Asian American museums across the United States had this kind of colonial idea. Take the goods, display them, don't relate to the contemporary world or
the communities.
Or the communities. And it was just so disturbing. It just is parallel to the history of colonialism in the US.
Yeah. And I was involved with some other groups, and I was involved with Festival 2000. And it was a mess. So I was organizing Chinese American artists to have a show through Festival 2000. And it turned out that the former executive director was using the money destined for our budgets if we won an award. He went and bought gold bars or something to give to the consultants. And so he informed me. He says, "Flo, I'm sorry, but your group." Well, they gave me first. They gave me the grant, and they said we have to take it back. And I said,
and they thought you were going to be okay with that.
I said, "What do you mean take it back?"
That's outrageous.
I've worked with the museum in Santa Clara with the curator. We have everything all ready to go, and you're taking the money back. How can you do that? So I was still teaching school, but I would drive out every day to whatever meeting I found, and I literally yelled and screamed and cried. And finally, Renee said, "Okay, Flo, we'll get you to be quiet. You know, we'll make sure that you get them. We got our money back." He says, "Boy, Flo, nobody can say no to you, huh?" And at one of those meetings where I was yelling and screaming about getting the money back, I think one of the guys was worried that I was going to cry in public, and I was near tears, because they were shutting us down. And that's not right. What happened was every time we tried to say that there's the door open, there's opportunity, somebody came along to close the door.
Bang, yeah.
And you don't close doors on Betty, Kim, me, and other people. You don't. We just find another door to open.
Well,
we build our own door.
It's almost like when they close the door, you're like, you didn't just do that, did you?
Yeah.
Because if you did, well, honey, you're going to be in checkmate. We are coming after you. We are coming after you.
Yeah. And if you saw my temper tantrums at the Festival 2000 meetings, you would have seen me saying something like that.
I love Flo's temper tantrums. Flo gets up and she lets it ride. I just love it. And the way you say it is so articulate, and you're just like, well, let me tell you a story.
Yeah, one time I went to a Women's Caucus for Art panel at Mills College, and it was a big famous woman who stood up after I spoke, and she says, "Why do you have a chip on your shoulder?"
Oh,
no
Lord,
kidding.
Lord,
And I
Lord.
said, and my answer was, "Would you like to see the chips on both of my shoulders?" And it was. I could not believe how closed and how rude and how they didn't want anybody except whites.
Yeah.
It was racist.
Sure was.
Pure and simple racist.
I think the one thing to learn about AAWAA is, though it was an organization for women and Asian women, we also interfaced with men and all different organizations wherever we could. We were bridge builders. We were not like just this group that's just for the group, but we're like, change the society. That's really, I think, what the pedagogy was really about, was create a different art world than we have, and create a different world that we have.
Right.
And that we belong. We belong. We belong at the American table of culture, whether you think so or not.
I love this whole inclusion and belonging movement now, and how strong it is, and how vigorous, and how everybody has to kind of do the big deep dive around equity that still is a problem. And it just makes me feel gratified that the steps we took created an organization with an infrastructure that the young women can relate to now, and that they can kick that can down the road. Because that's planting the seeds for the young women coming behind us. Means the world to me.
As I got active into NWCA, and I realized that, and Moira and I that time were promoting the work of Bernice Sink. We wanted people to know, so when we talked to curators or museum people, I decided I would nominate Bernice for the Lifetime Achievement Award, because for all the things that she did on the West Coast, and she went to China and all of that, well, she wasn't getting any recognition anywhere, and she worked with the baby watching in Chinatown, gave them art supplies, took their guns away so they weren't killing people. They started to make art, and I wanted Bernice to be recognized for that. And so on my own, I nominated within the structure of the NWCA Bernice, and for 3 years they said no to me, and then they called Moira. And Moira said, "Oh my God, yes, she's deserving of that." And then when Moira put her Good Housekeeper stamp of approval on Bernice's, nomination, then it happened. So I went to New York, gave the speech about Bernice and everything else, and there was a show of her work at the Triton Museum. It was hard, but I was energized. I loved getting in my car, at 3:30 and coming up to San Francisco. I was just hell-bent on getting Asian Pacific American women artists and male artists, a place
Right.
in the sun, whether the sun was big or small.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the discussions and the debates that we had inside of AAWAA. What do you guys think?
That's a good idea.
Like what is the mission of AAWAA? Like it was just a debate, a kind of tension. Like, do we want to make our work making ourselves commodities,
Right.
like the most important thing about the group, or does the group want to take a tact of trying to affect change in the society kind of at large? And that was a tension inside the group, and I just wondered if you guys had thoughts about it now. Do you remember it like that, or how do you remember it?
Yeah, there was a division in early AAWAA. There were people who just wanted shows and to have a chance to socially get together. And there were those that understood the political situation in a wider context. And both of them were important, but I on my own, I held out for the broader kind of a concept, because what happened was that at early AAWAA meetings, the Guerrilla Girls came. And they were mostly white. I recognized some of them because I knew them from other places, and I recognized. But they wanted us to follow them.
Right.
They didn't ask us what we wanted,
right,
or would it be appropriate for our needs, and what are our needs? Follow us.
right.
And they didn't understand when I said, no, I don't think it's possible, because they arranged with me to come to a meeting at the Oakland Chinese East
But
Bay.
also, don't you think we didn't want to be anonymous? They wanted to be anonymous.
We didn't want to be anonymous.
We wanted our faces to be seen.
We wanted visibility.
Yeah, so it wasn't about that.
They were looking for representation, kind of this broad women's front,
Right.
And actually, the fact that they were all white, as far as we knew,
There were a few.
was really
There were
a
a couple of.
detriment to they were trying to make an approach to us, but there was a contradiction in their.
There were some Asian American women involved.
Well,
Pardon me?
There were some Asian American women in.
I mean, none of these
Guerrilla
things
Girls.
are counterposed, but
No, right.
But sort of if you're wandering around trying to figure out what is the efficacy of the group,
Yes.
and
Yes.
and it did become social, like in a way, and that I guess that's when I started to drift away, because I didn't want a just social group. Like I wanted a group who could keep blazing trails. That's kind of how I wanted to do it. So I guess that's kind of the why I faded, not because I didn't love everybody. I totally did, but I guess I just needed a place where I could keep up organizing and trying to make things different. And I just felt like AAWAA wasn't at that place right now, or at the time.
At that time, yeah, at that time.
At the time, yeah.
Yeah.
Betty, what about you? I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I agree with you, Kim, on that.
But I guess I had avenues for activism that I could understand how it wouldn't attract AAWAA people. They were just regular folk. And whereas I was really more involved in, that was in the 90s, stuff about the diaspora. And I do remember that tension in terms of being contributing to people's professional careers, which I could see was a necessity. One of the things that we felt about AAWAA was that we had to develop our own writing. So for instance, I did do some writing. I wrote about Hisako Hibi and Miran An and Yang Sun Min and Minko. And it was published in Feminist Press to try to fill that gap in content. We didn't have enough writing about Asian American
art and women artists and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of networking is very important and viable. That's what an organization is good for, really, providing that kind of support. And I
Yeah.
do think that visibility of Asian American art itself does depend on, that focus of being visible. And how do we represent ourselves in an activist, in a political way, for instance? That I think is also a possibility, but it isn't something that, I don't know, it's either organic and it happens because the discussions and the motivation of all the people or many people in there that helps that. And then otherwise it doesn't track, kind of like
Right.
that did really happen with under Cynthia and people in terms of AWA in the last 10, 20 years, is that it really became very much a
LGBT survivors kind of oriented direction, where it looked at issues for women that were needing solution, kind of like needing support, that kind of thing. And I think Cynthia Tom was very instrumental in developing that kind of activism. That was activism.
And you know what? Maybe we should address is what Nancy did for AWA is and to make it into a 501c3. That made all the difference.
Well, I remember that
Nancy
conversation
Hahn,
very well.
that is
It
fantastic.
was at Lydia's house, Lydia Dagaro's house.
Yes.
My own orientation coming up through the 80s and 90s and going to conferences like the Association of American Cultures, multicultural oriented groups, organizations, national and local and stuff, that they looked at how small organizations like church organizations that reflected cultural identity, that when they became a status as a nonprofit organization, it required them to have a corporate structure that changed the dynamics of their institution. So you have important cultural groups that is, when they became nonprofit entities, they became a different kind, not just a community organization anymore. They became, an institution. Because of that, I thought that would be a problem for AWA. I mean, I spoke for people staying together as a loose organization without a structural nonprofit form, but really I was wrong. And the fact that that Nancy, who had a strong connection with nonprofit organization, Kearney Street West, and she just came up with all of the nonprofit 501c3 relationships. She persevered in that group, and they decided that they wanted to pursue seeking 501c3 status. And I think that was in the 1990s. I think that because of that, AWA was able to survive in a way that I don't think my way would have been able, like a community group, more dinners and kind of like that kind of thing. That was the way I was seeing it, kind of like this community organization. Whereas it's much more able to survive over the long period and have projects and go after grant funding and stuff like that.
Well, AWA has grown in a way that really allows AWA to be a presence with power and with control. At the beginning, when we started AWA, it was part social, part, oh my God, I'm so happy to see you and let's meet again in a month. And I'm saying that's not necessarily wrong, but I'm saying that it doesn't have that political, sustainable structure. And so what happened was that I left AWA after helping out for 5 years. I was driving up between Sunnyvale and Oakland all the time, and I finally hit the point where I was just exhausted, because at the beginning, when we had some of the meetings, some of the members didn't speak out. They weren't used to articulating or having their voices heard or putting their requests out on the table. So when I came home, I got phone calls And they told me, Flo, next time, will you do this? Will you do that? I said, no, I can't speak for you. You have to learn to use your own voice.
Yes.
You know,
get leadership skills.
yeah.
Skills.
And we didn't have a lot of leadership skills when we started. We were so brand new.
Yeah, a lot of people were, well, there were some people like you and Betty and a few that were really fiery, Bernice, myself, but then there was a lot of people very polite.
Yeah.
And we had to tell them, those days are gone, sister. You have to get going. You got to do something different. You've got to get your voice heard, like you said, Flo. And I think that I agree with Betty. I think that becoming a nonprofit has really made AAWAA into an amazing place to be able to do that and go after that kind of funding. But I just think one has to figure out a way to exist into capitalism, which is such a problematic, elephant that we have, but it's the only elephant we have. So it's like you want to amend it, but you also need to ride it. And so it's kind of, unfortunately, but artists are always dealing with the contradictions of being on the top and the bottom at the same time. And I try to instill the same kind of spark and igniting qualities in my students in every class that I teach, and especially now, so it's to me it's very exciting that AAWAA's got staff, and actually can create an archive and take care of an archive and do an interview. That's just wonderful. And it gives it a larger mission. I just am glad they're there doing whatever they can do to keep it going. And now you guys know to the level of the social engagement that we had in the beginning. And you can see how beneficial that is overall in the society, and particularly the San Francisco Bay Area. I feel proud about it. I feel like we did so much work that was painful at the time, but
it was really painful.
But it was. I remember, yelling and crying and feeling ignored, etc. But now I feel differently. Not that those things have gone away. Like there is still structural racism built into the society, but I feel like now we have a chance. Like now we have a leg up that we didn't have before. And I'm just admiring of the young people coming now after us, and how wonderful they are, and how they're very savvy.
I wanna tell you guys why I came back to AAWAA recently. It was Reiko Fuji who invited me to go to San Jose to the Japanese American Museum to see the show, and so I said to my husband, let's go, it's close by and everything else. And I ended up just being in awe of the show itself, but of meeting the younger, newer members. And I went, golly, this is just amazing, that AAWAA now has leaders of this quality. When I realized that I wanted to come back to AAWAA, I knew I was coming home.
Wow, that's so cool, Flo.
Yeah, and I had no idea that I was missing.
That's so cool.
And then I started meeting individual members of the new AAWAA, and I went, okay, these are the kind of young people that I want to hang around with.
That's so nice.
I don't want to wither by myself, out here. Because the Asian American population where I live are the recent immigrants, and they don't understand what I'm talking about.
I see. Yeah.
The struggles that my parents went through, the struggles that those of us who are the creative people, that we're Americans, we belong here, but nobody seems to want to pay attention. But it's when we formed a critical mass. AAWAA is a critical mass.
That's
and it's
cool.
It's gonna last for the longest time. And I think of Moira's, just being there and absorbing whatever energy, and then members giving back to her.
Wow.
She was a wonderful backbone for us, but she didn't try to dominate AAWAA or tell AAWAA members what to do. She was there in support.
No, she was very
No,
very
she
clear.
You wouldn't do
She
that.
she only accepted invitation when there's other artists of color on the panel. Like
Yeah.
I remember her saying that over and
Saying
over
that was her
again.
thing.
Yeah.
Well, she maintained relationship until the very end. There were things at Pro Arts Gallery where I was the director, and she would show up for that. And there were things that brought us together back. And I remember really toward the end that she had changed a lot, and but we still had a kind of the same vibe from 40 years ago, or whatever.
That's so
And
great. I know.
Yeah,
I got
that
to
is
see
something.
her too. Like when she started to get dementia,
Right,
I
exactly.
before she got moved out of her house, I went over to the house. She wanted to see my film, and so I showed her my film, and she sat there, and we just talked about it. She was so excited, and it was so great to spend that time with her because shortly after that she went into the home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when she
She
was
had a
in,
way of being, okay, that was so interesting.
And she always liked to have dinner parties where she
Yeah.
made the menus and wrote them out by hand,
Yeah.
and like that was so super
And she put the
cool.
wine glasses in the freezer.
yeah,
Yeah, she put the plates in the oven. Yeah, yeah,
and her kitchen was really teeny tiny,
yeah,
you know,
yeah,
and it was just a really I want to say a heyday, meaning just a bubbling of energy, a bubbling of support for art, a bubbly support for women and women artists of color, and
yeah.
she was very nice when she was asked to appear on panels, and she says, "Who are the people of color on the panel?" None.
Yeah.
So then that I can't
I
come.
can't go. Yeah.
I won't be on your panel. And she had no idea that when she asked me to organize, and I went to Betty, that AAWAA would result.
Yeah.
And because I saw at the beginning when I came into AAWAA, no matter what political stance we took, I just saw AAWAA as a group of sisters.
Totally.
I mean, I was so happy to find people who understood me, who looked like me, who could understand. I just loved that what AAWAA did to go out and reach out, and as a result of reaching out, all kinds of circles, interchanging circles, just locked arms, and we might not see each other a lot, but we still have fond memories and gratitude for each and every one of us who went through all the work that we went through.
Wow.
It's really amazing. It
That's
just
amazing.
is amazing. And look at what you guys are doing now. Just
Right.
I just love to hear about the agenda, the activities, and everything else. And going to Sherry's house for that backyard, party that we had. Oh, I had thought I had died and gone to heaven, and
Nice.
it was just. But I wanted to be there. Let me change it this way. I needed to be there. It was for me. I wanted to be
Awesome.
fed again.
That's
And
awesome.
it's AAWAA that fed me. When I come from my working class background, now when I read my poems and things like that, it's not where some of the audience understands.
Yeah.
When I'm with Asian American women
Yeah.
artists especially, I don't have to explain myself. They
Yeah.
go, "Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about."
Right.
And that's so comfortable to do that and be that.
Well, I think being an artist, sometimes you have all these near misses of wonderful things,
Yeah.
Sure.
and then you miss it, and then you've missed it, and then and then suddenly you have something, but
Yeah.
it's just kind of up and down. It's like we said, the waves and waves that you have, and we have an inequitable society, and also they don't value
Absolutely.
art as much
Yeah.
as some other societies, and so here we are, with scrapping. We're still scrapping around.
Well, actually, the scrapping is changing a little bit, I think, and the situation is changing, but we really are looking for the visibility of Asian American artists.
Yes.
Period.
Yeah.
And visibility, because it's been invisible all this time. It continues to be invisible. And
Yeah.
visibility is the thing that can bring up all these other things that we've talked about, whether it's career or activism or anything like that. I just want to kind of point to that as a association of women of color, and what was satisfying about being just in a safe place
Yes,
together,
yes.
and what we could create and learn from each other. So there's that.
Before we close for today, I do want to say thank you. I just asked one question, and that's all that needed to happen. Were there any final thoughts that you wanted to share with everyone? I think you've reflected quite a bit about both the ups and downs and the progress of how AAWAA has been in and out of your lives, which I appreciate, and I love hearing how you're looking at AAWAA now or reflecting about your time in AAWAA now. But I just wanted to make sure that we had a little bit of space for
All I
for
can
any
say is
closing
thank you
comments.
for letting me come home.
That's nice. I want to say thank you also because I think your efforts are really important, and that you're creating the model for what AAWAA will look. What you're doing now is what AAWAA is doing in the future, because whatever you're doing now is really creating that moment. It's like in African American tradition, they say ashe. Ashe means let it be, so it is. And it's really a function of art. When you do it, it becomes, And so what you're doing is becoming what is the future. And so one of the things about AAWAA is to support each other, and in terms of being visible, and then also to explore more and more of our family, which is really, really minute in terms of how we can explore, bring more diversity into our community, our family. And it's looking at everybody. We are just a tiny little speck of what the Asian American community is, so there's a lot more to do and a lot more to bring out.
It is time that we are recognized. We do damn good work. We work our butts off. We get tired, but we still come back.
And I want to say thank you to Flo and Betty, my Asian sisters here that I've known for so many decades. It's so great to see your faces again.
Likewise, definitely to see yours.
They're just a great feeling, a family feeling. And for me, I like being with another group of people, kind of talking about how we all can be kind of together and having a group conversation on what makes a better world. And I want to leave the earth having done something to make the world a better world. And AAWAA was part of that.
Yeah, AAWAA is a part of that. Yeah. Definitely. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. That was just a wonderful session.
Thank you. It literally is from you.